Okay, let's talk to James. James, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being on.
Thank you, Jason.
You know, I like starting these podcasts by getting a feel and understanding for James the person. So if you could entertain us for a bit, tell us a bit about your upbringing, where you grew up, and maybe some early influences in your life.
Right. So I was born in Australia, in Victoria. Spent probably the first 10 years of my life here. Went over to Western Australia. Left home when I was 15 to return to live with my dad for a couple of years, and then left finally when I was 17. Went off to uni, and like a lot of people, that was a fairly formative phase of life for me.
Sure.
So did a lot of travel. I had the opportunity to work with some pretty impressive people as a research assistant or a PA to some people that were super interesting and very generous in what they shared with me. And then took a bit of a right-hand turn, and instead of going down a corporate path, ended up going into the outdoors, really.
Sure, yeah. And it says here that you studied international politics and natural resource management in university, in ANU. Interesting transition from studying that to now running a tech company.
Yeah, you've done your research. Well done.
That's our job.
So, look, and I actually studied a lot of things. That's what I graduated with. I studied in a lot of different disciplines while I was there. And look, I'm really pretty passionate about the environment. I find, I guess, politics really interesting at that kind of more of the global level than at domestic politics. I was lucky enough to work for a couple of years in an environmental consultancy whilst I was at uni. Sure. And I worked out pretty quickly that I actually wasn't that good at science. I wasn't really wired to become a politician on any level.
Right.
And what I guess I identified was that when I sat there and looked at how decisions were being made and how negotiations were occurring, it was really more about how people were interacting and communicating and making decisions. That was the actual barrier to getting really important outcomes.
Sure.
It wasn't a lack of good science. So that was a convenient conclusion to come to, because then it gave me the opportunity to say, well, rather than just going off and trying to become more technically competent, really what I need to do is go and learn more about people. And a great way to do that would be to go and actually, I guess, dive deeply into the whole leadership and people development space.
Okay. And how do you transition from that to being a mountain instructor? It says here that you're a mountain instructor and you led expeditions up to 90 days in the Canadian Arctic Circle, US Rocky Mountains, and even the Kimberley region of Northern Australia. Mm-hmm. Was that from your passion through natural resource management that led you into that?
I guess I'd sailed all my life, so I'd been sailing since I was about 5.
Okay. Wow.
My family's fairly outdoorsy, so I don't think I'd stayed in a hotel until I was like 20. Most of our holidays were camping and outdoors.
Okay.
I started teaching sailing, as in blue water sailing, which means you can't see land anymore.
Right.
From the age of about 17, and whilst I was at uni, I worked with Outdoor Ed with school kids. And so it was it was a relatively straightforward transition. And I started out working in Outdoor Ed. That industry, you start out working with kids, and that was great. Wasn't really what I wanted to focus on. So then I actually had a pretty serious injury, so I took some time out, then came back and got more into what ended up leading me into the long-range expedition space. Yep. Which I loved. I mean, it wasn't tourism. It was all 100% training, leadership development, teaching the Utah State University leadership and management program. So it was a really strong academic focus and in a really strong, real life focus. And when you're out in the field for 30, 50, 70, 90 days, it's not like you just get introduced to a triangle and a new concept. You get to try it out and re-habituate and kind of build muscle memory in different ways of working with people, different ways of making decisions, different ways of assessing risk. Yep. And why not do that, on the side of a funky mountain on the Arctic Circle?
Cool. Yeah.
Seems like a good idea to me.
Sure. And leadership seems to be something that has been pervasive from what we just spoke about in your time in university, to your time through being a mountain instructor, to then your first few careers as well. You were a senior leadership and decisions consultant with CSM Knowledge. You were a senior learning and change consultant with Foxtel, and eventually became a principal consultant and partner with BizEd Services. Could you just summarize how you ended up being a senior leadership and decisions consultant, and what those years looked like for you?
Yeah, look, it sounds random, but I guess from my perspective, there was absolute continuity.
Okay.
Like, in leading expeditions, which were fundamentally about leadership development and technical skill development, it's about teaching people. It's about the learning process and providing and facilitating that process. So whether it was learning how to either manage risk or deal with an emergency or make a decision after a long couple of weeks, it's like it's still that learning environment. So when I came back to Australia, it was just like, well, how do I take those learning and development skills and apply them in the corporate space? So I just went straight into learning and development.
Sure.
So teaching people how to use technology, which at that time I knew nothing about.
Right.
But I knew how to get people to learn. So I only had to be half a step ahead of them technically, and it was really successful. I joined Foxtel. I was actually, I would say, pretty junior in that organisation, despite the title, but it was an interesting transition. So there was about 900 people in their call centre transitioning from analog to digital, and It's like, how do you get them all to know how to do process A on one day and process B on another with a completely different product set?
Right.
So I ended up having a lot to do with that. And then BizEd was a outsourced learning services business. So I stayed very much in that learning and development stream. And BizEd was was an outsourced business processing organisation. We had probably 20 of the ASX 100 as customers.
Yep.
And it was that experience that kind of took me out of the learning space and into more the business space.
Okay. And is that where you first noticed the procurement solution opportunity?
Yeah, and I probably didn't even look at it as procurement.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I just looked at it from a very, in hindsight, naive, simplistic way and just said, wow, we've got these customers and they're all household names and they've got thousands and tens of thousands of staff, and a lot of them are allowed to buy stuff, and they're going and buying lots of services, and they're poorly defined, kind of fuzzy goods. And then
Sure.
you've got thousands of suppliers in the market, especially in the space of HR and learning, which is a poorly defined market.
Right.
So you got this, the language back then, which I would use would be like, you got this sort of many-to-many relationship buying fuzzy, poorly defined goods.
Sure.
And it was just crazy. Like, I just looked at it and just said, this is just, it's not logical. It's invisible. There's no transparency. There's no process. There's no real competitive tension. There's no insights from the buyers about really, is this the best capability in the market for what I need?
Sure.
And then you look at the suppliers and they're sitting there going, how on earth do I bash down the walls of working with a ASX 100 or a tier one government organisation? And then they're sitting there, and then underpinning all of this, they're using emails. And it's just like, what a crazy scenario. Like, no one's got any insights, any real capacity to make informed decisions. So they're just doing what they did last time. And so really, familiarity is the dominant methodology that people use when they're buying in procurement. It's the same, some familiar suppliers, same familiar process. Suppliers are trying to talk to the same cohort of customers potentially. So it's like, I just looked at it and just said, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Now, I was in a unique position because we were managing, many tens of millions of dollars of buying between these big corporates and this supply chain. So we were able to see this whole dynamic.
Sure.
That was really what had me say, there's got to be a better way.
Yep. So you saw a gap in the market or a problem that was dying to be solved in some sense. Were there no companies out there doing, the solution to that problem and solving that problem?
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of B2B platforms, there's lots of commerce platforms, there's lots of procurement platforms, but they tended to operate at two ends of the spectrum, either at the bottom end in like catalogs, shopping cart. There's loads of that tech, and there's some really awesome tech out there.
Sure.
In that moving boxes kind of environment. And then there's a lot of smarts and a lot of technology in what they would call strategic procurement, where you've got a professional buyer running a sophisticated process to get, better value, less risk, all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And then there's this tranche in the middle. It's unsexy, it's uncool, it's low value. It's, we're talking $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, which in the context of an organisation, relatively low. And they go, just go and get 3 quotes.
Yep.
So you got these non-professional buyers using pretty basic process with really no visibility, but it's just this sort of ignored corner of spend.
Right.
And
okay.
look, there's still, most organisations are still at that point where they'll have procurement teams and functions, and yet there's this long tail of low value sourcing that is still largely invisible and unmanaged, and that is the bit we get excited about, because it's like by doing that we can like seriously transform elements of that organisation in terms of their relationship to the market, their relationship to suppliers, how they spend money, and then what becomes possible when they look at the way they're spending money.
Sure. I feel like we're getting into the origin story of Vendor Panel here. We're seeing the early formative thoughts of starting your company. But before that happened, BizEd was acquired by Talent2, which was an ASX listed company, if I'm correct. Not many people get to go through an acquisition. What was that experience like for you, especially since you were a partner at BizEd?
Yeah, so I was a junior partner. So there were two founders and then kind of a senior partner and then two junior partners. I was one of the junior partners. Having said that, I managed the majority of the workforce that reported into me, and I had the majority of the revenue in terms of customers. But in terms of how long I'd been at the organisation, they were more senior than me. And it was just an awesome opportunity to be a part of that process. And yeah, I mean, I ended up sort of, running a large chunk of that when we got acquired. I didn't do the deal, so I wouldn't make out like I brokered the deal.
Sure, yeah.
But once the parties got together and there was, interest, then I was definitely part of the due diligence. I got to get exposure to all of that. And we were doing that. Obviously, there's the four partners that were involved, really. One of the other partners wasn't so much. And then still running the company on the side. So really running that split process for a while.
Yep.
Yeah, massive learnings.
Yeah.
And both learning what I would want to do next time and what I would absolutely do everything to avoid.
Sure. And given that you were running such a large part of the workforce, what was it like on the team culture? People are generally quite averse to change. So when an acquisition happens, did that rock the boat at all for your team?
Look, I think we did a pretty good job. Once it was announced that we were going to do the acquisition, I think we were very focused on looking after our people. Like that was a big part of the deal, was what's going to happen to the people in the business. So we were really conscious of that. And,
sure, yeah.
And we worked really hard to have it be a good thing for staff. Invariably, some people will leave. They don't necessarily, over time, they sort of say, maybe this isn't the right place for me as the new culture. But yeah, there was a lot of work put into kind of supporting our own internal staff. Probably could have done more work on integrating more broadly into that company. Like I think that could have probably been done better in hindsight.
Right.
Yeah, and it was very different cultures. Like there was definitely some challenges.
Okay.
We came from even at a functional level, we had a small hand, like 20, 30 major long-term customers.
Right.
They were a business that had, way more staff than us, but they was way more transactional. It was a recruitment company. They'd also acquired payroll, so that was more similar to us.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it was a really interesting journey. So it was the acquisition, and then it was the, I guess, the merger component and becoming a part of that.
Okay.
So both of those were really interesting.
For our listeners out there, if they're about to be acquired or thinking of acquiring, do you have any tips for them in a simple, short sentence or two?
Eyes wide open.
Yep.
Like, go and talk to employees of the company that's inquiring you, not just the people you're doing the deal with.
Okay.
Obviously, you need to be discreet in that, but I think that would be prudent.
Yep.
And look after your people on the journey.
That's great. Thanks for the tip. Not a lot of people go through that, so it's great to hear from someone who has. And at some point, you decided to start VendorPanel's. So it's been a 10-year journey for your company. You started the company in 2008. Talk us through what inspired you to start the company and what those early days looked like for you.
Cool. I actually originally took the idea to the new acquirers and said, hey, I think we could do this function instead of doing it with so many employees. We could do it as a digital solution. At that point in time, for a bunch of factors, there was close to zero interest in that journey.
Okay.
And so I basically, wrote out a document and got the board to approve that if I went off and did this thing on my own, that it was mine, not theirs, and they would cast me loose, and as long as I didn't do it at work.
Yep.
So that's kind of very squarely put it into the ballpark of I either do this on my own outside of work or it doesn't happen.
Sure.
And look, I guess I'm not of a disposition that working in a large corporate is really my style. Like I did my earn out. I did a little bit extra because they made it really worthwhile to do a bit extra, like another 6 months, but it wasn't the right place for me.
Sure.
So I guess I was moving out of that space, and that was a point in time in my life where it's like, if I'm going to have a go at this, like now's a good time. I was lucky to have obviously made some money out of the exit.
Yep.
So I could afford to go without money and income for a while. And, I didn't have kids. And so it was like, well, just have a go.
Yep. And what did you feel like in the early days? Was it scary? Was it daunting? Was it exciting?
Look, I was pretty considered at the beginning. So I commissioned a whole heap of research to validate whether or not it was... And by that, I don't mean I had some big research company. I paid someone to make a heap of phone calls.
Yep.
So let's not make it sound bigger than it was. And I was just like, here's the 4 questions. I want you to call these 300 organisations and speak to this sort of person and answer these questions. It just validate it. And then I took a month off and went and designed it. I'm not technical. I designed the solution kind of as a logic data flow.
Okay.
And then went through a process of trying to find someone to work with to develop it.
Yep.
Eventually found someone as a CTO kind of role and engaged him as a contractor. So he wasn't like, I want to be part of a startup. He was like, I'll build it if you pay me.
Sure.
Once he got his head around it, he's like, you can pay me less if you give me a slice of the pie.
Wow.
And then I kept working. So for a while, I just split my salary.
Right.
The jumping off point was, I guess that's when it got exciting and scary, because that was like, now I'm actually going to cut the umbilical cord. We're a month out from production.
Yep.
I'm going to quit. Let's go.
Right. Wow. And for the first few years, you bootstrapped the company for 3 whole years and went through numerous pivots as well. So what was that like?
I so underestimated time and effort.
Right.
It was a train wreck.
Okay.
Yeah. It was, look, the technology always worked really, really well. It's always been super solid tech. We went through 5 different brands, 5 different commercial models.
Wow.
5 different kind of starting points in addressing the problem. And we went through those pretty quickly. Like in the first 12 months, we'd been through those 5 different pivots. Back then, I don't think we had that term, but yep, that's what we went through. And kind of at the end of the first 12 months, we sort of worked out what was going to happen. We got our first serious enterprise customer, and even that itself was its pivot, because we'd started out as a sort of like a straight go-to-market, much more open platform, when we ended up working out that enterprise was a better place for us.
Sure.
And then the scariest bit was actually signing the first customer, which I didn't realize until after we'd signed it.
Right.
And it's like, wow, sure, I've been paying 2 people's salaries and I haven't been paid for a year and a bit. But suddenly we were signing a contract that was like, wow, up until now I could pull the pin and the only thing that broke was maybe a little bit of disappointment and maybe my ego got a bit bruised or whatever. But I had the freedom to walk away. And I was now signing this paper that meant I couldn't do that easily.
Wow, yeah.
But the contract wasn't paying enough that it was viable. So suddenly it's like, I've just locked in for 2 years with not enough money to do it for 2 years, and I'm going to run out before then. So we really need to find some more customers now. So I really hope we've done the right thing here. So and that was the most, in some ways, that was the scariest point, because I didn't have a parachute.
Right. And was that the last pivot that your company made? Were you selling the solution that VendorPanel is working on today, or was that still a different idea back then?
I guess we were selling generation 1.
Right.
There's probably 5 layers to the problem set. We worked out which one was our starting point.
Yep.
But it's expanded way beyond that. So we started out just really managing, we're a large organisation and we started out in government, and they've got their preferred suppliers. How do they get that to work better? So if you've got a panel of preferred suppliers, how do you optimize that? How do you get that to operate more effectively? Now it's expanded over the years to be a full stack sourcing platform, and it's a much broader story, but it's still fundamentally solving the same problem, which is when you've got decentralized, non-professional buyers going and buying stuff, through quotes, proposals, tenders, whatever.
Sure.
That process is overwhelmingly hidden in emails, manual, inefficient, full of risk, probably the biggest risk hotspot in terms of procurement, and loads of value being left on the table.
Right, okay.
So it's still fundamentally the same problem set. Our tooling now is dramatically more sophisticated than it was in 2010 when we launched VendorPanel formally.
Yep, amazing. And just a question before we jump forward. A tip for the listeners out there on how you recruited your first CTO, because for a lot of people, finding a co-founder is quite a tough and daunting experience as well. It sounds like you've done a good job at that in the early days.
Yeah, and I guess it wasn't like I'm going to go and find a CTO.
Yep.
And Rob, who really was the technical lead, he was really clear in what was he up for.
Okay.
So, which was interesting, like the idea of someone who was jumping in and like, this is us together and we'll do it together would have been really attractive.
Yep.
But you got to be pragmatic. Like, Rob had a young son. He had obligations in life. He didn't have the freedom to just jump in and say, let's see what happens.
Sure.
So, the reality is he's pretty experienced. He's seen a lot of good ideas go up in flames.
Right.
He's like, look, I don't know this market as well as you. I can understand it and I can build it, but I don't know if I would back it yet.
Right.
So I had, he was on the payroll.
Okay.
So we've collected a number of people, but it was, people have had periods of going without income or whatever, but it was it wasn't necessarily like I'm co-founding this sort of at a formal level. But from my perspective, they've definitely put in the blood, the sweat, the tears that I would consider them kind of in that co-founder set.
Yep.
Like they are core to who the company's become.
Yep.
I don't think any one of those arrangements was the same as the last one. So Rob was a contractor. Mark had taken a redundancy, wanted to do something fun for a while.
Right.
Worked for him. Another friend wanted to just break out of the corporate space. Well, wasn't a friend to someone I knew. She wanted to break out. It was something to try.
Yep.
David, who's, moonlighted for a long time. The cool thing is none of them have left. Like,
that's amazing.
Everyone's still there.
10 years on.
Yeah. Sort of like Hotel California. Like no one leaves.
We'll play that over this as we're talking.
And it's just at different times. But I think that's one of the things is like it's got to work for people and their stage of life, their risk appetite. And I think that was part of the juggle. So in finding co-founders, I think this sort of utopian thing that they're in it in the same way that you're in it.
Sure.
Man, I think that would be really tough. And I think if you can find it, awesome. But I think it would be tough.
What's your secret sauce on convincing these people to jump into the abyss of a startup? It seems like you've done a good job at that.
I used to be really structured in the way that I would do it. And a lot of that is like if you call them interviews, but really it was just sitting down and chatting. Like
sure.
I would put a structure to that. And one of those very clearly, I would sit down and say, cool, I want to catch up with you again next whenever and we'll have a coffee. And it's like, and just to be clear, I want to spend the entire time of this conversation explaining to you why this could very really be the worst decision you've ever made in your professional life. And I actually really need you to get that.
Yep.
Like I need you to take responsibility for the gravity of that decision because it could be a train wreck.
They know what they're signing up for.
I need you to sign up for because I don't want to carry this responsibility for you.
Right.
I need you to go in, but I need you to go in informed. And I don't want to be in a scenario where you turn around and go, seriously, man, you duped me.
Yeah.
Because I think that happens in all sorts of recruitment, not even founders. Like you look at, we've doubled the size of our employee headcount in the last 12 months. We're hiring grads, we're hiring experienced people.
Amazing.
But like, even in that point, it's like, I really have an issue with this idea of recruitment where people sell a job. It's kind of like, look, why sell it to them? Why not just tell them what it's really like? Because they're going to work it out soon enough. And you don't want them to come for 6 months and leave.
Yep.
So no, that was a really big part for me. And I would also explain to them why I wanted to make it, why I thought it was worth it. So I just lay it all out.
Yep.
Like, this is why I think it's awesome. This is the opportunity. This is the idea. This is how big I think it could get. This is why it's a terrible idea. This is why I'm actually really hard to work with.
Right.
And there's elements of me that it's like, I get it. Like everyone else, I've got my flaws.
Yeah.
I think I'm relatively self-aware, so I might as well tell you what I think they are so that you can decide if you want to work with someone like that.
That's amazing. The transparency and honesty that you bring to the conversation probably helps you filter out the right and wrong people for what you need and for what they need as well.
Definitely some people that we had 2 meetings, we had 3 meetings,
right.
And that was it. And that's great. What an awesome outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2.5 years in, you were actually actively looking for jobs because I think you mentioned this before in one of your talks, that it was a rough period for you. What changed?
Like, why was I looking for a job?
Well, why were you looking for a job, and why did you then decide to continue with VendorPanel?
We tanked. Like we absolutely bottomed out. I have very vivid memories of, going to the ATM and emptying my personal account and counting out the $20 notes.
Jeez.
And then being like, well, I don't know. Let's see if there's some more in there next week. Like it was, and that didn't go for a week. Like it was pretty grim for quite a long time.
Wow.
Financially. And I think, in hindsight, I think that was not just financially challenging, but it took a toll. Like I think for a while there, probably my confidence took a bit of a battering. Like if I made a really, really bad call here, but I guess why was I looking for a job? It was functional. I needed to pay bills. I guess I was wavering in my belief, but it was interesting because I got an offer to a job through a very close connection to GM, someone else's company, and I guess they had the backstory on me, the advantage of that, which was good. And I had some really good straight chats with them in that process.
Sure.
And they were smart enough to say, look, if you want the job, you've got it, but you have to shut down this thing you've been working on.
Right.
And I was like, why? I don't need to shut it down. I can do it on the side. I have sufficient integrity to manage the delineation of that.
Yep.
And they were smart enough to say, you have to shut it down because that's where your heart still is. And I think you're only taking this job until that gets some life in it, and then you'll be out of here in a heartbeat.
Wow.
And the reality was, and right in that meeting, I said, you know what? You're probably right. And so, I couldn't accept it. This is this guy's company, right? I can't go and mess with that. So I was like, you know what? You're right. My heart is still in it.
Sure.
So that kind of was an interesting point in terms of going, what can we do? And we scraped through. Luckily, David was managed to make sure that, financially we're always sort of viable, but as a company. So, but yeah, on a personal level, it was pretty grim.
Yep.
And so part of it was I couldn't get a job.
Sure. So no one would hire an entrepreneur.
No one would give me a job. So we just stuck at it. And then I guess our first customer, we had a really successful case study. We were able to demonstrate a lot of what we'd hypothesized. We won a bunch more awards off the back of that, and that sort of gave us enough credibility to get into the meetings with the peers of that organisation in every state of Australia.
Yep.
And once we did that, I think they all fell within 4 months. So we kind of went from grim to profitable eventually in a really short period of time.
That's amazing. And what would you attribute that success to?
God, I think, people focus a lot on having a great idea.
Right.
The reality is we had I had a very good insight to a significant problem and probably a unique perspective on that given the experience that I'd had. And I think we had some really good perspective on how to address that at a tactical and practical level. But I'm also a believer that the good idea is about 5%. And it's about execution.
Right.
And the reality is we have always executed like we were a company that was way bigger and way more established. And I don't mean fake it till you make it. I mean we had systems and processes. We had standing operating procedures, and we only had one customer.
Right.
But it was kind of the market that we were in was so incredibly unforgiving that it's if we drop the ball once, the game's over.
Yep.
So we had to really execute well, and we had to deliver on every single promise that we made.
Sure.
Which meant we said no a lot, which some people found weird.
Okay, that is a hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, we're pretty good at it. And it's because we just can't afford to say yes and do a shabby job, or we couldn't afford to say we could do it by that date and miss a timeline. And I know that most technologies have technology companies have a reputation for being that.
Yep.
And so part of our original brand was we're not like other tech companies.
Right.
And we've been introduced from customer to customer on that basis sometimes. It's you know what? You'll either like it or you won't. It'll either suit you or it won't. But if they say they can do it, they can.
Yep.
And that's a great premise to go into a customer, because we're not saying we can solve all their problems. We're really clear on the problem we can solve. But it's awesome to have a customer say, but if they say they can do it, then they can.
Sure. And as a leader of the company and a founder of the company, how did you find yourself setting the culture of the team to be able to say no, to be able to have a focus and process and rigor? Was it an easy thing to implement for a leader like yourself?
Look, I think we just called that really early. Rob, he was originally the only developer, you know, he was just very clear. He's like, don't ever put me in a position where I'm in hot water. Like, don't sell something that doesn't exist.
Right.
And we took that to an extreme. Like, we would wait till it was fully in production before we'd even tell people it was coming.
Okay.
Which is the opposite of probably a lot of thoughtful models.
Absolutely.
But it meant that we were never exposed. And it meant that we could take our time and be like, it's okay, but I'm not happy.
Yep.
And it's like, well, then spend another month on it until you're happy. Because no one knew. So no one was breathing down our neck saying, where's this thing?
Sure.
Now, that obviously changed. As customers came on, more and more customers, they start demanding roadmaps. They start demanding timelines. So, you know, then we've had to build in rigor and rules internally around like what we'll agree to, what we won't, how far ahead will we commit in a roadmap. So that's now more... as the business grows, we have to address some of the challenges that you're talking to. But in the original days, it was just hardwired.
Yep. And I'm doing a bit of a time jump here now, but 2018 seemed like a very, very big year for VendorPanel. You raised $2.35 million in your Series A, and you've gone up to 1,200 corporate clients as well. You've grew the team to 25, 30 people. I think you mentioned 29 people earlier on when we were chatting. That's a big relief for you. It must be a big relief for you. It's a 10-year journey.
It's a 10-year journey, and it's not my exit, you know?
Yeah.
I'm really clear on that. Like, I don't buy into the whole, I'll be successful when I raise money. And I know that I'm out of sync with most of the startup world at the moment on that.
Yep.
You know, I guess I'm maybe a bit more old school in that. I'm like, build value.
Sure.
Build a company that creates value for all of the people that are touching that company as best as you possibly can. And, you know, there's a little bit of like, and the rest of it will sort of sort itself out. So we didn't need the money when we raised. So we were definitely unusual for the VCs. Because we were turning up, you know, I think at that time we had, I can't remember how many customers, but, you know, we had a really solid customer base. We were profitable. We'd been profitable for years. We'd proven out all of the original hypotheses. We'd expanded the hypotheses. We'd proven them again. So we'd shown we could continue to innovate. We'd shown we continue to be at the bleeding edge of the market.
Sure.
And we can do it not just once, but twice, but 3 times, but 4 times. Kind of every 2 years we have a major kind of, not just a roadmap technical release, but a conceptual release. Like we think we can push people this far now in their understanding of what's possible.
Sure.
So yeah, that was, we were not needing to raise, but in a survival sense.
Yep.
But there was just these things that were out of reach.
Okay.
We just couldn't organically make some big steps, both in terms of our technical development. You know, we really didn't, we're a very unsophisticated sales and marketing organization.
Right.
So we grew our way because we're good at solving problems and building a good product.
That's great. Could you just talk us through the process of raising investment from start to finish?
Yeah.
You've touched a bit on it by engaging one of the big 4, but what else was involved?
All they did was the audit. They were not involved in we didn't even tell them we were doing a raise.
Sure. Yeah.
It was just, I just want a point in time, how do we compare?
Okay.
Yeah, if we'd told them they were doing a raise, they would have tried to get involved. So what did we do? We probably 18 months out, that was obvious on the horizon for me that was a necessary piece. So I was really lucky to have a really solid mentor for the previous couple of years. And we sort of went through and said, like, structurally, are we ready? Forget if you believe where we're going. Are we ready? And our company structure wasn't quite right. So we had to do a whole sort of corporate restructure to become a PTY company. We'd actually set up as a unit trust originally.
Gotcha, right.
We didn't have a board or any formal governance structures. And I was quite nervous about what that would mean. Sure. So luckily this member of our board is, he's very experienced. He's been on quite a number of sort of tier 1 ASX boards. So he brought an ocean of experience that made me feel confident going down that path. So we put in place a board. We restructured. So we did a lot of our housekeeping so that we were structurally sound. We obviously were really comfortable talking to the product and the problem, and we had product market fit.
Yep.
So then it was like, cool, so where are we going? And really just documenting that. It's pretty vanilla. There's a million places you can go now to find out how do I put together a pitch deck?
Yep.
Turns out, just do what they say.
Sure.
That's what VCs are expecting.
Yep.
Be predictable. And so we pulled that together, and I literally just went, cool, as of November 1, I start talking to people. So just, and LinkedIn's pretty handy, work out who knows people, friends, relationships. So any warm intros, great. And then some cold ones too. Increasingly, the VCs have, many of them are more accessible now than they ever were. So yeah, we just hit them up and just here's an email, and in 7 bullet points, that's why we should talk.
Yep.
And I was kind of really pleasantly shocked at how many people wanted to talk.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah, I think at that point we had $1.5 billion going through the platform per annum. We had, good numbers around users and customers and profitable and this and that. I think they were a bit intrigued. It's like, okay, not normally what we're getting.
Yeah.
So that was really good, and it was great. We got a term sheet offered. We went through multiple rounds of investment committees with another one. So we went through, sort of whittled it down. And then we got to a point where it was like, you know what? This isn't right. These VCs that we're talking to are great.
Right.
But what they want us to be and what we want them to be, we're not actually a match.
Okay.
And that was a really productive kind of point to get to. And I think I learned a lot about really taking time to genuinely understand the formula. Because I think the formula for every VC is different in terms of what they understand, how they look at the world, what they're focused on, what sorts of businesses they want to invest in. Many of them are good at articulating it. Some of them are not so good at articulating it, but you got to work it out because it's there.
Okay.
And yeah, we worked out relatively quickly that a bunch of the people we were talking to, it just wasn't going to work.
Yep.
I was going to resent them and they were going to hate on me. And a lot of it was around the sector we're in, the business we're in. It's not like raise money July 1, tip that into SEO, August 1, numbers go berserk. We're just not that company.
Sure.
So, we've got I think at the moment, this year we're on 99.2% retention. So we've got almost no churn. Customers don't really leave.
Yep.
But we've got long, slow sales cycles. We've got, things don't change in a hurry because we're talking about big enterprises with relatively slow decision-making cycles. And to some extent, we're asking them to look at a problem that they've probably been ignoring for a while.
Sure.
So yeah, I just called it. We got to mid-December. So it was all happened in sort of 6 weeks. And I was like, this isn't going to fly. And I think they were a little bit relieved as well because they were sort of like, this is great. We love where we're going. We love the team. We love the problem. We love what you've achieved. But I think it was best summarized by one particular guy. He said, if you can do half of what you think you can do in 3 years, in 1 year, then just tell us how much money you want.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't need to half what we're going to do. We can do that. And we've hit every number we've ever said we will hit.
Sure.
But it will take 3 years.
Yep. That's amazing.
And if that doesn't work for you, this is going to suck.
Yep. So is it down to
agreed.
Is it down to gut feel in that sense?
No, I just think it's just it's
chemistry between.
No, I think it's mechanical. They're sitting there trying to get you to fit into a spreadsheet and look at your forecasts and go, do you fit the trajectory that we need to invest in? What is our return multiples that we need to see in what time frames?
Interesting.
It's really structured, right?
Yep. Okay.
They don't necessarily show this to you, but it's there.
Yep.
And it's we're not going to fit, and that's the metrics of it. And then there's just their disposition. I think they just would have got frustrated. It's why are you guys taking so long? It's because that's how it works in our gig. Yeah. We understand our market.
Yeah.
Now, what was really cool is we'd built enough trust and good relationships that we actually said to them, who do you reckon we should, once they agreed, they're like, I think you're right.
Right.
And it's so who do you think we should talk to?
Okay.
And then they were like, wow, you should totally talk to these guys and these guys and these guys. They love this sort of thing. And so they ended up introducing us to the people that invested. So I went, right, I'm going to take a step off. It's Christmas. We got the team together back in January. We had learned a lot about how big this could get. I think I do appreciate the VCs really pushed me hard on how big this could be. And I think in reality, when I looked at it from a different lens as like, wow, yeah, you're right. Like it could actually be so much, like I was already excited and it's like, this could be so much bigger than we'd realized.
Right.
Or been confident enough to claim. So we sort of went back, pulled those numbers apart so we felt comfortable and then went, let's go again. And basically the next two people we talked to, well, the next one we talked to came on board. They took out the whole round. Then I went and saw the next guys. We had already filled the round. They were really interested. And we had to kind of go back and try and negotiate some space and then extend the round a bit because we really wanted them in strategically.
Sure.
So that ended up being more of the administration of it because that was a relatively quick process from there. And once we got clearer in who would be the right investor and we just narrowed in and it was like,
wow,
that made it much easier.
And was that just 6 weeks from start to finish?
So the first sprint of like go out, talk to them, realize we're talking to the wrong people was about 6 weeks.
Right.
And then went about in Jan, maybe late Jan, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was probably another 6 or 8 weeks to get to the point where it was like term sheets are done. And then it was DD, which went, that went for another whatever.
Yep.
Couple of months probably.
And they closed in August of 2018.
No, we closed in June.
June, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
We might have closed, I think we closed early June and we announced in July, something like that.
And
technically, we sort of agreed on everything and then we decided for some mechanical reasons to just wait until the 30th and just execute on a round number.
Sure. And for the people listening who are thinking of doing a fundraise, was it did you lay out an entire fundraising strategy prior to going out to investors, or was it more of a ad hoc thing? What was your just general strategy towards that? Was it planned from start to finish?
Well, I guess you kind of got to know why you're raising money, and then it's reasonable to say, what are you going to do if you get it?
Yep.
So I guess there was a pretty clear plan of what does the raise look like to us?
Sure.
Me being me, I just wrote that down. So I ended up with like a 60-page document, which was the strategy.
Wow.
I think anyone wanted to read that, right? But it meant that I got to be crystal clear in my mind how it all mapped together.
Sure.
And it made it much easier for me to then articulate it and get the whole company on board because I didn't want them coming in and talking to even a junior member of the team and them going, I don't know where this company's going. So I was really clear. It's like we all are on this one boat.
Yep.
And then you got to compress that down to like 6 bullet points and then 10 to slide deck and then a 3-pager. But in terms of the actual process of talking to VCs, I just kind of treated it like a sales process.
Okay.
I went, what do I think the 10 steps are here? Or it's probably 7 steps. We did have a CRM by then, so I just created a workflow in the CRM and I just like, here's my prospects. I've had my first call. I've moved them to, normally I would move them to like an intro demo. Here I've moved them to a first coffee. And then so I just really did that. And it was just a numbers game and just push them to a terminal point. They're out, they're in. I actually love talking to them way more than I expected. People talk about how hard it is, but it's like, I just love, like, you don't have to fluff around with all the small talk. It's like you can get a long way in 15 minutes.
Straight to the point.
And, and most of them they'll blow out and obviously, they get interested and they want to know more and more and more. But it's like you can pretty quickly work out who's interested and who's not. Right. Mutually.
Yep.
And I really loved how quickly they said no. The ones that said no was awesome. They're just like, man, sounds great. Well played. Doesn't fit us. Yep. Who can I introduce you to?
That's great. Yeah.
And you're just like, that's great. I want to speak to someone who fits this profile. They're like, I only know one guy, but I'll introduce you. Great. And you're like, I've only got halfway through my latte. But it's like, I just loved how quickly that would process through. Yeah. And then, but I guess in that time you can also build enough credibility or rapport that they'd be willing to say, well, who do you want to talk to? Because it's not me. I can only invest in this sort of stuff, but sounds interesting. So maybe you should talk to them. So great, thanks.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So now you've taken the money. You're on an extremely strong growth trajectory. What's next for VendorPanel?
Well, I think the growth trajectory for us, as I indicated in sort of the story, is like there is this kind of step for us. So there's been a huge growth in terms of our investment. Sure. And we're only now starting to really see that impact, which is 7 months after we raised, 8 months after we raised. Yep. So, there's probably an element where that may be pretty normal, but like I know a lot of the VCs were wanting to see like big impact in the first quarter. Sure. So we've played pretty true to plan, I think. And we're just now starting to see that come through. Look, so what is it about for us? Look, there's a big tech piece. I think there's a huge opportunity to keep focus on the same problem, but just do more stuff that's kind of cool in that space.
Right.
Then in terms of growth, or we have big investment in sales and marketing, and we're just expanding. We were largely government. We've landed in a couple of mining companies this fortnight. We've never had anyone in that sector before. We've got more and more this year. We've picked up a significant presence in the construction and infrastructure space. So pushing into new markets. And then also we've had a pilot running in Canada as a new territory.
Yep.
That is going really well. So we're now at that process of sort of like, what does that next step look like?
Sure.
There's one other geography that we're sort of flirting with. But look, it's the same problem, just, more of it.
Yep.
And we're really mindful not to kind of snap the elastic band. It's like, we will not try and go everywhere in the world.
Sure.
We will focus in certain areas, in certain markets, just because I think that's a better bet.
Amazing. James, I'd love to spend more time picking your brain on new markets and expansion, but we've only got time for one more question. So I'll end with this. If someone wanted to get involved with Vendor Panel, whether it's a customer or a potential new team member who's interested, or a prospective investor, what should they do to learn more and get involved?
Oh, look, I think at a superficial level, it's, you go to vendorpanel.com and you can start learning about it that way.
Sure.
We just hired a guy who's basically been contacting and interacting and seeing us at events for the last 6 months.
Okay.
So that was how he's managed to get in the loop. But I think whatever's the doorway that gets opened, I think it's about understanding what we're about. Because for us, it's not just about money and risk. I think we've got this part of us that's, we're a very commercial organisation that plans on making plenty of money. But when we look at, we're managing, probably do $3 billion this year, and it's like, that's cool. But it's like when you start thinking about what you can do with that money once you manage it better,
sure,
you can start looking at that as a very, very significant lever for driving positive social change. So a big thing for us isn't just about reducing risk in procurement or saving money in procurement, even though we do it. It's like there are certain bands of procurement, and they're very, very big, where it's like, if you could do that better and save money and save risk, you can also drive local economic development and regional development, and you can support Indigenous communities and disability enterprises, and you can drive really positive social change whilst still doing better procurement than you were before. And I think it's like you got to kind of get a handle on, like, what are these people about? What is this organisation about? That's part of what we're about. And so, we've got customers that are pretty excited about that. We've got customers that are really just want to reduce risk and save money and make things easier.
Yep.
But, they're on a journey, and sometimes they're starting to understand. But for our staff, if people are joining the company to be part of the team, they kind of got to get what we're about. There's a bit of Gatorade there.
Yep.
And we think it's a huge opportunity.
Amazing. James, congratulations on your success. I think you embody the spirit of entrepreneurship really, really well. You've been in Vendor Panel for 10 years, but in many ways, the journey has only just begun for your company. And, we can't wait to see what you get up to. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Great. Thank you very much.